Okay, so what I'm going to be showing you in this demonstration today is how to upgrade from your existing legacy license server to the new NLS licensing model. As you can see here on screen, I've got a legacy license server configured on my VMware vSphere console. I also have a couple of DLSs which we're going to be configuring from scratch. And we've got a couple of client virtual machines as well, an Ubuntu Linux VM and a Windows 10 VM. So, if we take a little look at our existing legacy license server here, you'll see we've got a couple of entitlements on it. 128 licenses of each. As you can see, there's a couple of licenses being used already by services. If we look in the license clients here, you'll see it is in fact our Ubuntu and Windows 10 VM that are currently using those licenses. Okay, so here we are within the NVIDIA licensing portal, and as you can see here we've got a couple of entitlements that are already allocated to our Flexera or legacy licensing service. Now if we go into the license servers and list the servers within here, you'll see we have our existing legacy license server defined. Now there is an option here to migrate legacy license servers across to the new NLS model. However, what I'm going to do today is create another license server alongside this and gradually move resources across from our legacy license server to the new NLS licensing server. Just gives us a little bit more control, allows us to do a bit of testing without doing the one-way migration from legacy to NLS here. So if we click on my legacy license server here, you'll see 128 are allocated. If I now go to Actions and Manage Features, what we can do is just reduce this count a little bit. So in this case, I'm going to go down to 100 licenses of each on here, which will just free up 28 licenses for use with the new DLS. We could do all of them if we wanted to as well, but in this particular case, I'm just going to move a few. Now, one of the things you'll notice, even though I've now reduced this license count to 100, if we go back into our license server here and just hit the refresh, we'll see that nothing's changed. Okay, we still have 128 licenses available, and that's because we haven't actually downloaded the license file through into our offline license server here. So everything we're doing in the portal is not going to have any effect on your existing licensing service. Your users and the leases are going to work just the same way as they did before you started configuring things in the portal. So just to be really clear here, all of this on our offline license service, Flexera or legacy license service, is going to stay as is. Nothing we do in the portal is going to make any difference to this until we go ahead and download the licensing bin to that legacy license server. Okay, so we can play around to our heart's content in here without any problems. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is download and install our virtual appliances onto our system. In my case, it's vSphere. In order to do that, we go to Software Downloads and we'll see all the various downloads that are available. Now, if we do need to upgrade our virtual GPU software before going to DLS, you need to be on version 13 or above to actually leverage DLS. In fact, if you're on version 15 of vGPU, you'll absolutely need to use the DLS. We can go in here and using the filters here, we can decide what platform we're on. In my case, I'm on vSphere. And this will give you all the various versions of virtual GPU that are available. What I'd normally recommend is that you go to the latest. However, you might want to go to a slightly older version just to get long-term service release or something like that. Now, there's another option in here, non-driver downloads. And in here, you're going to see all of your DLS options listed. So if I go into platform once more, choose my vSphere platform, you'll see here the latest version of DLS virtual appliance is version 2.1. So that'll be the one we're going to need to download. Hit download and get it onto our network. Now, I've actually done this already. In my particular case, I've downloaded that zip file and I've taken that and extracted the OVA file that we're going to now install into our vSphere platform. So go back into vCenter. In order to do this, all I need to do is go to Deploy OVF Template, go to the local file, and then go through the wizard to configure this. Now I could call this NLS test, for instance, and it's going to go in here and ask me whereabouts I want to install this virtual appliance. It's going to do various compatibility checks, specify the storage type, all of that sort of thing for us. As you can see here, we can choose which storage this is setting on. We're okay to provide thin provisioning for this particular virtual appliance. What network this virtual appliance is going to land on, and then we go in and fill the static IP address details of the virtual appliance. Now watch out here slightly, because some of these boxes are in slightly different order depending on what version of the virtual appliance you download. So you can see here, in our case, the IP address is down the bottom, so we would just give it a 192.168.1.26 for instance there. But then we have DNS server up here, so my actually DNS server is 192.168.1.14. Now another thing to point out here is that the net mask prefix is actually done in CIDR format. So in our particular case we need to type 24 in here, not 255.255.255.0. Okay, just put in here the gateway like that and hit next. Now once we've done that, hit finish. That's going to import the virtual appliance. That's going to take about 5 minutes to do, and then we can go ahead and start up our virtual appliance. In my particular case, I've already configured two virtual appliances already, DLS1 and DLS2, and I've actually just booted them up from default. Okay, so there's nothing too amazing in here. One thing you will see is that when it came up, it'll give it the IP addresses that I allocated these virtual machines in the setup routine. Now, when you're booting these VMs for the first time, you might see a DHCP address appear in here momentarily. Make sure that you give this virtual appliance a couple of minutes to run its scripts and get set up for the first time. After a couple of minutes, you will see the correct IP address entered here. Now, another thing you'll notice is there's a 172 address on here. Don't worry too much about that. That's just an internal network that the virtual appliance uses. The DLS actually comprises two containers, two Docker containers. And in order for those Docker containers, both the service, the DLS service and its database to communicate, we have a little internal network on there. So that's the 172 address you see there. It's just exposed within the virtual appliance for internal use only. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the first setup screen for this. So if I click on here, you'll see this virtual appliance is ready to be set up. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is a first time setup, and I'm going to set this up as a brand new virtual appliance. So give it a password. Okay, create a diagnostic user to pull the logs if we need to. It's just going to give us a little secret there if we need to reset the appliance. Make sure you note that down. Continue to log in. Then we're going to log in as DLS admin with the password that we just specified. Okay, now the first thing you need to do is you need to tell the NVIDIA online portal about this virtual appliance. But before we do that, all I'm going to do is go in here and just change the name of it, because by default, because this is a default virtual appliance, it's just going to give us the date and time this virtual appliance was created. Okay, just default. Doesn't mean much in the NVIDIA portal. So let's just go ahead in here and actually change this to something more meaningful. So we're going to call this, in my particular case, DLS London. Okay, just go ahead and change that description as well and edit service name. So when this now does appear in our portal, it'll have a meaningful name associated with it. So what we need to do now is download our DLS instance token that we can then upload into the portal. So I'm just going to click there. As you can see, we've got a DLS instance token now that's available to declare to our NVIDIA portal. So let's go back into our NVIDIA portal and do that. Okay, so to do that, we go to Service Instances, go to Actions and go Upload DLS Instance Token. It's a new installation. There's the DLS Instance Token that we created earlier, and click Upload Token. And you'll see here now, DLS London has now been declared to our online portal. At the moment, the status is pending because there's one further thing we need to do. We just need to register this within here, just for security reasons. Okay. Now you can do an offline registration if you want to as well without exchanging any tokens for more secure environments. Just check out the documentation on how to do that if you have an air-gapped secure environment where you don't want to be sending tokens back and forth. Okay, so now let's take advantage of those 28 licenses that we configured and create a new server. So I'm going to call this DLS London in my particular case. Give it a description. Now there's a few other options we can use here. This could be a legacy license server. This option will disappear when we stop supporting the legacy license server on July the 31st, 2023. However, there are some other options here that's just worth mentioning. One of them is Express CLS setup. So if we were setting up a cloud-based licensing service and not deploying an actual appliance down to our own infrastructure, then we could set this up in Expressway here. Also, disconnected leasing mode. This is something that's new to DLS version 2.1. And what this means is you can have a license key per virtual machine. Those license keys can be disconnected, so the license server doesn't need to be on in order for those leases to work. Okay, so the advantage of that is that you don't need to have your licensing service online all the time in order to make sure that your clients work and function correctly. However, the negative side of things is you have to manage a license file per virtual machine. Okay, so it's called node locked licensing. It's another way of putting it. In this case, we're just going to go ahead with a standard installation. Come across here and we're going to specify those 28 licenses that we have available for our virtual appliance here. Okay, once we've done that, preview the server creation. Okay, that's all looking good, and just create our server. So now we've created a new licensing service for DLS. We've now created a new service instance which represents our DLS on site. Now we need to do a bind to bind those two different instances in the portal together. So bind the service instance to this license server. Okay, it's only showing us the one we have in there, our DLS London, and we're going to hit bind. Okay, and that's done now. All we need to do now is just take that license and actually download it to our DLS. So if we just hit the download button there, I'm going to go in here and just get that license. So there's our license file we've created in our folder, and we can now go to our DLS and install that, and we should be operational in a few ticks. Okay, so back in our DLS, what we're now going to do is we're going to install this license file in here. Select license file. There's a license we created just now, and install server. As you can see, we now have a fully configured DLS set up for London. We've got all the features that we installed on it, the 28 there. We've got a default licensing pool and default fulfillment conditions as well. So this is now good to go at this particular point. However, what I'm going to do before I progress any further is I'm just going to enable high availability of this license server. Now, you'll remember that I actually have two virtual appliances, DLS1 and DLS2. And up until now, I've been using DLS1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set DLS2 as an HA pair along with DLS1. So let's just copy that address in there and go across to the service instance of DLS1. Now you can see we've got primary node health in here. This is our primary DLS server. In order to configure high availability, all we need to do is go into configure high availability, enable it, and it's just going to ask us to do a little paste here and just ping the other virtual appliance to make sure that the two HA pair ends can actually see each other. In this case they can, so we're just going to go ahead and create that cluster. Now what's happening here is that we're creating an HA pair. We're going to have DLS1 as our primary service and DLS2 as our secondary service. Now secondary services can't actually lease out licenses at all. Okay, they're just literally sitting there as an active passive standby DLS. If we had problems with DLS1, what would happen is DLS2 would lose communication to DLS1 and it would promote itself to being the primary lease giver. When DLS1 comes back online again, it'll see that DLS2 is the primary, and it'll set itself as secondary. Now, all the information is now being synchronized between my primary node and my secondary node. You'll also notice that we've been given a fully qualified domain name as well. Now, these FQDNs haven't been set up when we set the appliance up. What happens is when the virtual appliances boot, they get their own static IP address. What the appliances do is a reverse DNS lookup of that IP address, and if DNS has a reverse entry in it, it'll actually populate these fields here. So you can see dls1.mvtest.local and dls2.mvtest.local. We recommend that you use DNS for here, because when we create our token, which gets installed onto our virtual machines that are asking for licenses, having DNS records in here is a lot more portable. So we could change the IP addresses on the back end if we wanted to, and it wouldn't have any effects on the DLS tokens that we're using. So that's what we would definitely recommend. So now that we configured both our HA nodes, all it remains to do is to download our licensing token. Okay, so we're going to generate client configuration token in here. Okay, we can choose within here whether we use FQDN inside this token, because obviously this needs to know the IP address or FQDN of both our licensing services when our clients are requesting licenses. We can do it with IP address, or if DNS is working correctly, we can just go ahead and use FQDN. I'm just going to use FQDN in this case. Okay. Now I tried there to specify that token without choosing a scope reference, and it gave me a little error here. You need to specify the scope reference. So the scope reference is the default one that it created earlier, which is for all of those licenses we put on the DLS. And we can now download our client configuration token. As you can see, there's the client configuration token. What we now need to do is move this client configuration token down to the virtual machines that are going to need licensing. We can also put it on a file share if we want to, and actually have a single point of administration for that client configuration token. Just make sure that when you do that, if you do put it on a Windows file share, for instance, that you give the workstations rights to that file share, not the user that's using the workstation, because obviously the NVIDIA driver loads before users are connected into these virtual machines. So you need to make sure that the workstation has the correct file system rights to view that client configuration token. So that's a way of doing it centrally, or just move that token to the right place on the virtual machines, which I will show you in the next step. Okay, so now let's take this client configuration token that we've created and show you how to install it inside a Windows virtual machine. So let's go ahead to a Windows virtual machine. This one's currently configured with the legacy license server. You can see here on NVIDIA control panel that we have the legacy license server ID configured. Now we're not going to need this anymore because our IP address is baked into our client configuration token. If we just stop the NVIDIA display container service, we'll actually de-license this virtual machine from the legacy license server and return that license to that legacy license server. Now the first thing we just need to pay a little bit of attention to is the registry. So on virtual GPU 14 and below, the registry keys for licensing are held in this place: local machine, software, NVIDIA Corporation, global, grid licensing. Okay, and there's two directories here, grid licensing and grid software, that hold information about our licensing service. Now the only one we need for DLS or CLS is the feature type. Okay, so go to server address, we can actually remove that. That's going to be no longer relevant. Neither is server port. Now you don't really need to remove these, but just for tidiness' sake, I'm just going to remove those registry settings from there. Also under grid software, this is something that gets configured dynamically, so we can just go ahead and remove those from there too. Now if you're using virtual GPU 15, I wouldn't even bother with this because the registry keys have changed. We've gone to using the DCH driver with vGPU 15, and the registry keys are deleted from here during the driver upgrade and moved to a different part of the registry. Okay, now if you are using vGPU 15, really just don't bother going into the registry when you're configuring it. You no longer need to play with any of the keys in here. If you are using a version of vGPU older than 15, you just need to make sure that under grid licensing here, you've got feature type. I've got this set to 1. That could be just left blank as well. You don't need anything apart from just a feature type in here. This gets put in by the vGPU driver itself. So the next thing we need to do is just go to that client configuration token and actually just move it down into our virtual machine. So I'm just going to hit copy in there, go back to my virtual machine and just put it in the correct place. Now the correct place to put this token, okay, is under C:, program files, NVIDIA Corporation, vGPU licensing and client configuration token. Okay, that directory should be pre-installed for you. If you just come in here and hit paste, this isn't going to work because I don't have rights within this directory because it's a system directory. So let's just pop that onto the desktop, that client configuration token, and then within Windows we can just drag and drop it down to that directory. You need administrative permissions. Okay, let's just go ahead and do that. So now that client configuration token is in there, what I can do is now restart the NVIDIA licensing service and show you that that is now licensed. So in order to do that, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to show the tail of the log file just to show you what's going on when it's going on. So I'm just going to hit this command here. This is just a small PowerShell command that's just going to look at the tail of the log file for NVIDIA licensing. Okay. So first thing I'm going to do is just restart that service. So go into container service and hit start. Now what you're going to see is that NLS is initialized. Okay, it's going to give us a little message just to start off with that it's not found. And then once it communicates with our DLS, you now can see the license has successfully been acquired. It's from DLS 1, so we know that's our new DLS infrastructure, and we're now up and running with a lease. Now, what you can't do any longer is go into Control Panel and actually see that licensing. So for troubleshooting information, what you need to do is you need to be looking somewhere else. You see there's no licensing options here. What you can do is use the NVIDIA SMI command just to verify that licensing is here. So you can go into Program Files, NVIDIA Corporation, NVSMI, and type NVIDIA-SMI -Q, and then just pipe it to more, just so that you can see it a bit easier. If we look on the second page of this output, we'll actually see here license status license. So this is the new place to go to find out whether your client is licensed successfully or not. Now, let's have a quick look at the log file. This is another good place to go if you're doing troubleshooting. Go into Users, Public Documents, NVIDIA Logging, and there's a single file in there. And you can see here, here's the whole log file of everything this virtual machine has done since it was configured over a year ago, all the various error messages within there. And we can see right down at the bottom there, we get this thing here, license successfully acquired from DLS. So this is another good place to go if you're doing troubleshooting. Now, if we pop back into our DLS, what we should see if we go to leasing is we'll see that new lease in place. Okay, so we now have a lease registered, a virtual machine registered in here. It's got its client host name and it's got the MAC address of the network card. And this MAC address is really an important thing for licensing, because within here it defines which virtual machine has which license. So just one further thing that I just want to mention before we move on is that within here, if you start seeing some messages that look like, you know, tokens are without outside date range, or some sort of error messages in here related to dates or times, then what quite possibly is happening is that your time on your virtual machine that's asking for the license is not synchronized with the DLS. Now, because we're having tokens exchanged between the virtual machines of the DLS, it's very important that time is synchronized between those two things. So always make sure that time sync is in place between your DLS and your virtual machines. We've actually got a little bit of leeway there. The two can be within about 5 or 10 minutes of each other, but you know, really the best thing to do is to maintain time synchronization for an optimal configuration. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is show you how to do virtual GPU or NVIDIA AI Enterprise licensing within an Ubuntu virtual machine. In order to do this, I've just created a quick putty session to my Ubuntu VM, and I'm just going to upgrade my security on here just so that I've got the ability to do some administration. If we type NVIDIA SMI -Q, as we did within my Windows virtual machine, what this is going to do is show us that this is currently licensed. So we have the NVIDIA driver installed in this virtual machine, and we're configured to talk to the existing Flexera or legacy licensing service. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is just take a look at the configuration file. So if we do nano/etc NVIDIA and it's called gridd.conf, then we'll see that this is configured to talk to our existing license server. Now we don't really need to have anything in here, so we're just going to, for tidiness' sake, remove the server address and server port within here. The only thing you really need in this file, and probably the default thing that you'll have to do when you install the NVIDIA driver, is just make sure that we've got the option in here for feature type. In this particular case, the profile I'm using is an RTX Virtual Workstation profile, or Q profile, so my feature type is 2. If I was using NVIDIA AI Enterprise or Virtual Compute Server, I would put feature type equals 4 in here. Okay. All I need to do now is just quit out of this and save that file. And that's all we need to do there. Now what we need to do is copy that client configuration token down into this particular virtual machine. So what I've got is I've got a WinSCP session set up to this virtual machine, and I'm just going to get the client configuration token that we configured earlier on in this video and actually just move it across down to my home directory. Okay. Now that I've done that, I can just put it into the correct directory. So if you want to know where that directory is that the client configuration token is, it's under etc NVIDIA and it's called client configuration token there with a capital C. Okay, so that's where we want to put it. So let's just move that. So let's just copy from home the client configuration token to this directory here. And if we do a quick ls, we'll see that token's now in there. So now all we really need to do is we need to restart the NVIDIA Grid service. So we go in here and we do service NVIDIA-grid restart in our particular case. And now what we should see is that that is now configured. So in order to do that, let's just go back into here and do a NVIDIA SMI -Q just to have a look and see if that has taken. We can see we're now licensed within here as well. Let's just go ahead into our DLS and actually see that that lease has worked. So we'll go into here, just hit the refresh button, and what we'll see now is that our Ubuntu virtual machine now has a lease within here, which is great. Now, one other thing that we can do in the same way as with Windows, we can actually go in and look at the log file just to make sure that that license has worked correctly. It's under var log in this particular operating system. So var log, and it's called syslog. Okay, so if we go to the syslog file, we'll actually see in here down the bottom we should see some grid services. So we can see Ubuntu 1 grid D started NVIDIA Grid daemon, acquired license successfully from DLS1. So you can see here DLS1, which is our new DLS licensing service. So that's it. That's all we need to do on the Linux side to configure Grid or NVIDIA AI Enterprise licensing successfully. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do now is just decommission this Flexera license server completely. So as we know, our legacy licensing server here already has some existing licenses associated with it. So let's just go ahead and delete those licenses altogether. So let's go to here, click Manage Features again, and in this particular case, I'm just going to delete those licensing from there and update server features. Now, if we go ahead and download that license file now to our legacy license server, that license server will then be fully decommissioned. As you know, through this whole process, this license server hasn't changed in any way, so we haven't downloaded any licenses, so we've still got the full 128 licenses allocated there. But we can just turn this license server off now, and we're no longer going to need it. Now that we have some free entitlements, let's just go ahead and allocate them to our new DLS for London. Click in here, go to Actions, again, Manage Features. In this case, we can have up to 128 now, so let's just go ahead and put 128 within there. and we now have those features fully within there. Of course, the next thing we need to do is now tell the DLS about that. So we're going to download a second token. In this particular case, it's going to be the full 128 licenses. I'm just going to change the name of this so I can differentiate it. So I'm going to call this license 128. And then we're now going to put this onto our licensing server, our DLS portal, and we'll now have a full 128 licenses on there. Let's click in here. Now, the first thing we need to do on this licensing server is make sure that it's disabled. Now, this is because we're actually doing licensing operations, we're actually adding licenses. So we're just going to disable this license server here just for the process of adding those new licenses on. Next thing we need to do is go into our license pool and actually increase the license count within there. Again, let's just disable this license pool so that nobody is going to be requesting licenses from it while we are doing this. So I'm going to go to update server from NLP being the licensing portal online, and we're going to choose a new license file. license128.bin. Okay, install server update. What you'll see now within here is that we've now got 128 licenses available. We just need to give those to the licensing pool. Okay, click actions, manage features. We now see we have 128 to be used. Specify 128 of each, update pool. And that's it. We now got 128 licenses, our full license count. We're just going to enable that pool again to do licensing. Also, of course, we need to start our license server up again. It's actually enabled already, so we don't need to do anything there. It's completely up and ready. And we now have 128 licenses, our full entitlement to be used by our clients. So that really takes it full circle now. You've now got the full license entitlement on our DLS infrastructure. We can now go ahead and decommission our legacy licensing server. We no longer need this anymore. Thank you for your time.